this to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, everybody. We've got Jonah Goldberg with us today. This is going to be a really good one. It's going to be deep, and we're going to talk about one of the most important topics I think you can imagine talking about these days, which is the decline in Western civilization, and more importantly, the appreciation for the principles that gave us what Jonah calls the miracle that we have today. A lot of people don't believe it's a miracle at all. A lot of people believe that it's inherently corrupt and evil, and that America should be torn limb from limb. And we're seeing that in quite the literal sense these days. And it's very concerning to me. A few years ago, I read Jonah's book, Suicide of the West. And we haven't gotten to talk about it in detail. And I'm really happy to have Jonah on the podcast today to talk about it. Thanks, Jonah, for being here.
It is great to be here. Thanks very much.
So I'll introduce you a little bit here. You're also a fellow at American Enterprise Institute. You've been writing for National Review for 21 years before you started your own media company, The Dispatch. You've authored Liberal Fascism, The Tyranny of Cliches, and The Suicide of the West, How the Rebirth of Tribalism, Populism, Nationalism, and Identity Politics is Destroying American Democracy. I definitely recommend all of these books. Liberal Fascism has a lot to say about what's going on these days, too. Yeah. So we'll definitely talk about that. Tyranny of Cliches, people should just read that. It's the easiest read of all your books. And it really hits home. When did you write? That was older, though.
I wrote it in like 2012, I want to say, something like that.
Yeah, but it was good. Suicide of the West is dense. A lot of information packed in there, and so we're going to try and unpack it all today. Why don't you just help? Let's just start from the beginning. Like, what the heck is Suicide of the West about?
Sure. So you mentioned it before, the miracle, right? Say you're a visitor from another planet, and your job is to monitor human beings and their progress on this planet. Well, say you can only visit once every 10,000 years, and you started 250,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. On your first visit, what would you see? You would write in your little notebook from your spaceship, semi-hairless apes foraging and fighting for food. That was our natural state. That's what we are in a state of nature, is according to evolution and all these sorts of things, is we are we're not even apex predators. We're kind of in the middle of the pack. And that's how we lived. So if you were this alien visiting, monitoring us, you would visit 23 times, and basically you would see the same thing over and over again. You would say, semi-hairless apes foraging and fighting for food, no change. Now, there'd be some changes, migration, that kind of thing. But basically, we would be the kind of mess that we were as cavemen. And then on your 24th visit, you would see huge changes. You would see the rise of city-states, agriculture, some great clay pots, all sorts of organized religions, all this kind of stuff. On your 25th visit, your spaceship would be picked up by NORAD, and you might get here just in time to see something like Miley Cyrus twerking at the Super Bowl, right? Yeah. And so the point I bring this up is that almost everything that we associate with material, social, democratic, political progress has happened in the last 10,000 years, but that's misleading because it's sort of like me saying the combined net worth of me and Jeff Bezos is $120 billion. Mm-hmm. It's technically true, but he's carrying a lot of the load. Yeah. Almost everything that we really associate with human progress, democracy, material bounty, education, literacy, has happened in the last 300 years, and really in some ways only in the last 100 years. So there's no dispute about this among economists, anthropologists, sociologists. I mean, they might quibble about the math, but basically for 250,000 years, everywhere in the world, ancient Rome, ancient China, doesn't matter, the average human being lived on no more than $3 a day. And then once and only once in all of human history did that change. And it started in England and arguably also in Holland, and then came to America. And for the last 300 years, human beings have gotten less violent, healthier, their life expectancy has increased, literacy has increased. Everything that the progressives say they care about politics, for the most part, has improved thanks to the birth of liberal democratic capitalism. And while I'm perfectly sympathetic to people who say we got it because of God, that's a fine argument. I'm trying to persuade progressives, so I don't ground it in that argument. But
you bring God in at the end of the book.
God sneaks in,
way.
yeah, and God sneaks in at the end.
Yeah,
sort of spoiler.
You bring
alert.
it in the same way that I wrote about it in my book, which was God. The belief in God gives us firm principles by which to live by, and that's a lot more important than people realize.
That's right. That's right. And the reason I brought up God here is just simply to say that the reason why I call it a miracle isn't necessarily because of divine intervention. It's because we don't know why it happened. I mean, we have theories. There are lots of theories about where capitalism comes from and all these kinds of things. But the problem is it's only appeared once in all in human history. And if it were natural, it would keep popping up all over the place in the historical record. But it doesn't. It happens once. It basically happens in England. And it is the greatest, it's misleading to even call it the greatest anti-poverty program ever created. It is literally the only anti-poverty program ever created. For all of human history, elites did pretty well because they were extracting wealth from people below them. Mm-hmm. But for the average person, the only time in all of human history where their life expectancy, where their living conditions, where everything improves dramatically is because of liberal democratic capitalism. And when you have the reason you call it a miracle, or one of the reasons I call it a miracle, is if you don't know where it comes from, maybe that those facts should give you a certain sense of gratitude.
Yeah,
it's like, oh my gosh, this is the goose that lays the golden egg. I don't know why this works, but it works. Maybe we should try to protect it rather than like tear up its pen and let the foxes get at the goose, which is what we're doing right now.
But that's just capitalism. It's a lot deeper than just capitalism. You could certainly argue that the kind of extended order, invisible hand of capitalism, the most efficient allocation of markets, the ability of people to freely associate and trade their labor, that's all great. There's a lot more to the miracle than that. It's governing principles as well.
No, that's right. But I mean, this is, again, some of my friends on the sort of religious right had problems with the way I sort of don't make any explicitly religious arguments in the book, in part because what I'm trying to do is something that a lot of conservatives don't want to do these days, which is persuade people who disagree with us. Mm-hmm. And if for the sort of Marxist, leftist, progressive, whatever label you want to put on it, the leftist tradition is very much about material circumstances.
Yeah, yeah.
And to say, look, that's
true.
The improvement
the
in people's lives.
The high-minded governing principles just don't seem to care about that. Even though I think they're. But my point was also you do talk about them. It's not.
Oh no. That's exactly right. But that's one of the reasons why I emphasize it. The other part of it is that basically it comes about what I call the Lockean. It comes about from what I call the Lockean revolution, and which doesn't entirely explain the miracle, but it helps us understand it. Which is this idea that our rights come from God, not from government. We are citizens, not subjects. The fruits of our labors belong to us. A crucial part of it, which Deirdre McCloskey, a economic historian who's very influential on me, she makes this argument, is that up until the miracle, up until the late 1600s, early 1700s, innovation was considered a danger and an evil. Like in Western Europe, it was literally considered a sin, the sin of curiositas or something, questioning the established order.
Yeah.
Lots of civilizations were more advanced than us, but whenever those technological advancements started to destabilize the powers that be, they were crushed. So the Chinese stopped producing steel. They called back their ships. The Arabs stopped caring about all the scientific endeavors that they were doing. And for this weird moment in Western civilization, thanks largely to the weirdness of the English, innovation all of a sudden became this thing to celebrate, that if you could build a better mousetrap, you were a good person for doing so. And that's one of the things that drives the prosperity. But it also, what allowed the prosperity to last are these ideas that says that the individual is sacred, that they have sovereign rights, that the role of the government is to protect individuals, to let them live the best life that they want to live, rather than impose upon them a specific, meaning and place in life. Just as an illustration, one of the most radical things that no one gives their founding fathers any credit for is the founding fathers got rid of titles of nobility. Mm-hmm. For thousands of years. Nobility or royalty, however you want to call it, that's the original identity politics, right? Yeah. Is long before notions of race were even conceived of. It was this idea that if you were noble born, simply by virtue of the circumstances of your birth and who your parents were, you were a better person than somebody else who wasn't.
Right.
And they got rid of that, which was an incredibly radical thing to do. No civilization had done that. And the idea behind it was that you should be free to rise up by your own mettle, your own work, your own endeavor, to whatever station that you can. And we'll get to slavery, I'm sure, but that hypocrisy aside, which was an important driver of improving American life, this idea of getting rid of this notion that people were simply born into a station in life and cursed to live their entire lives as a serf or as in a caste or whatever, that was a radical thing that the American founding did, and we do not teach to have any appreciation for it.
No, there's not. It's quite the opposite these days, and it's outright scary. And there's a lot of reasons for it. We're going to get into it. The thing about identity politics, which you're right, it was the original identity politics. You talk about in your book how human civilization prior to the Enlightenment was basically just thousands of years of all sorts of identity politics. Right. And that might have been class identity. It might have been race. It might have been all sorts of things. These days it's morphed into something else. And it has a history in America dating back to the 60s as the New Left and Herbert Marcuse, they used it because they said, okay, Marxism doesn't work in America anymore. Right. Because the middle class is too dang happy. So why would they want a revolution? But we need to find other grievances. And this is really peaked these days. But the insight I like from Jordan Peterson makes this insight about identity politics is that it's so logically flawed, because as you start dividing people up into all these different classes, and then you have to divide into further subclasses from that, because, well, you're not just white, you're a white man, and then you're a white straight man. Well, are you Christian? Are you religious? Are you Jewish? What are you? And then, so this multiplies exponentially, and eventually you just start to ask a question like, maybe they're just individuals. If there's that many subsects, and this was the key insight of the founders, and it's being completely torn on its head. So why is that?
Yeah. So I mean, first of all, I think the way to think about identity politics in a sort of a basic American way, which is actually a very Texan way, I should say, is that one of the great things about our culture, and I think it's particularly true in Texas, is that you're supposed to take people as you find them, right? If you've got a black guy who works incredibly hard, he's diligent, he's a family man and all the rest, and you got another one who's, had a life of crime, or a white guy, same circumstances. There's no transitive property that says, because I know person A, therefore, and their skin color, I know anything important about person B.
Right.
And what identity politics does is it reduces people down to abstractions.
Yeah.
And one of the great problems when you reduce people to abstractions is it becomes much, much easier to treat them very, very badly. Because they're now just sort of representatives of an abstract idea, and they're not real people. And in America, one of the things that you're supposed to do is you're supposed to judge people by their actions, by their integrity, by their words, and not say, well, I was mistreated by a Chinese guy 10 years ago, so therefore this guy, I don't need to know anything more about him. Right. And we're losing a lot of that. And I think that part of the reason why we're losing it is, to be blunt about it, is laziness. There is a certain laziness in these sort of woke left way of talking about these things. It's very easy for them to organize so long as they treat everybody as abstractions. Right. It becomes much more difficult when you actually have to make arguments and that deal with the fact that, you can't just talk about, whenever you reduce a large numbers of people to a single variable, you're doing a great injustice to them. So when we talk about police, you can't say they're all white. You can't say they're all bad. You can't say they're all cruel. You can't say they're all corrupt. You need to actually have nuance and distinctions. And part of the problem, particularly in a social media culture, in a culture where national media controls everything, it's much easier to reduce large swaths of American people, our fellow citizens, into shorthand, into labels, rather than actually deal with the specifics of how people live and how institutions work.
Yeah, because it feels good.
Yeah.
And this is what you notice, human nature has not changed very much over time. And what has changed is the ability to think through the societal structures that allow us to live together peacefully. Again, this is why it's not just capitalism that's the miracle. It's a republic. Mm-hmm. Like these were other key. It's a republic, and it's a constitution that actually defends your individual rights no matter what the majority says.
Right.
These were incredibly important insights. I would point out the Democrat Party is trying to quite literally overturn the idea of the republic and these founding principles. And I could explain why, but I often have. Basically, they want 51% majority rule.
Right, which is an insane position.
Pack the Supreme Court, get rid of the filibuster. These are get rid of the Electoral College. Any federal institution that basically protected against majority rule, they want to do away with. So it's very clear to me what's going on. But the notion of feelings, right, and romanticism that you talk about, where did it come from? What's the origination of this? It's not new.
Right. Well, so as you referenced before, human nature has not changed, right? One of my favorite quotes from, I'm spacing her name for a second, but one of my, Hannah Arendt, Jesus, sorry, my apologies. I'm just driving me crazy. One of my favorite quotes comes from Hannah Arendt, where he says, every generation, Western civilization is invaded by barbarians.
Yeah.
We call them children.
Yeah.
Right. So anyone who's had kids knows this, that when kids come into this world, they are not blank slates. They are not like just creatures that can be made into the new Soviet man or the new Aryan man. They come with programming. But the thing is, they need updates.
Yeah.
And so what I often say is, if you have a baby today and you send it back 1,000 years to go live with Vikings.
Yeah.
Say you take a baby from Austin, Texas, and you take it and you send it back 1,000 years to live in a Viking village. Assuming it gets adopted, it'll grow up to rape and pillage the English countryside. Mm-hmm. If you take a Viking baby and you send it to Austin, it might grow up to run a macrobiotic barbecue shop or something like that, right? It all depends on the institutions that we are born into. Yeah. And that starts with the family. Families civilize the barbarians we are all born as and turn them into citizens. And they need help from other institutions. And so this is an insight that people have understood for a long, long time, particularly with males. If you do not socialize them correctly, human nature kicks back in. And whether it was Pat Moynihan talking about the Irish gangs of Hell's Kitchen or the young toughs of ancient Rome, when you do not socialize people to the customs and norms, civilized customs and norms of a society, their normal programming kicks in. And this is one of the reasons why I like a lot of apocalyptic pop culture. In Walking Dead, 5 minutes after the zombie outbreak, everybody breaks up into basically
tribes.
Tribes. They're not semi-hairless, but they're roving bands of tribes. They even have spears and stuff.
Seems very realistic. So does The Purge, by the way. That seems a little bit realistic these days, which is
there's some of that. But there's this wonderful book by a guy named Paul Bloom, a Yale psychologist, called Just Babies. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, and he surveys all the literature on the software that we're born with as babies. And it turns out babies aren't necessarily racist, but they are programmed to be fearful of the other.
Yeah.
And it's true of black babies and white babies and Chinese babies. Babies actually are born very quickly they cry in accents. So a Russian baby has an accent that's different than a French baby, that's different than a Ghanaian baby, that's different than an American baby.
Really?
Yeah, and it's amazing the stuff that they come into the world with. And they imprint on what their parents look like, and they say, okay, this is normal, and now I must fear the other. Yeah. And in the state of nature, that's a really smart bit of programming to put into a baby.
Right.
And so when people say, people have to be taught to hate or taught to mistrust, it's really not true. That's the preset.
Yeah. That's
what the barbarians come in with. Yeah. And what a civilized society does is it teaches you how to deal with strangers. And one of the wonderful things about the market is that in a state of nature, if you have a handful of apples and I want your apples, the way I get your apples is I hit you over the head with a rock. Mm-hmm. Actually, given the disparities in our fighting skills, it probably would work better the other way, but you get the point.
Smart me or
Yeah,
something.
but in a marketplace, I have money, you have apples, I give you apples, I give you money, you give me apples, it's win-win. And that's one of the wonderful things one of the more wonderful moral things about the extended order of liberty and markets and the rule of law is it says I no longer have to have this zero-sum attitude towards strangers because there are rules about how strangers are going to deal with each other. Mm-hmm. And those rules are really recent and they're really fragile. And when you start teaching people things like identity politics and tribalism that says simply because you're the other, you're white or you're Asian or you're black or whatever, I can therefore mistrust you.
Right.
that is a huge slip backwards towards the barbarianism from which we came.
You say, I'm going to read a quote because it's a good one for what you just said. The melting pot formula is breaking down in three ways. First, we are now taught that the government should give special preference to some groups. Second, as a cultural imperative, we are increasingly told that we should judge people based on the group they belong to. Assimilation is now considered a dirty word. And last, we are taught that there is no escaping from your group identity. This creates two things, divisiveness and resentment. And we're seeing it, I think, in full view right now. And it's hard for me to understand why anybody thinks it's good. So we're going back to the where this originated from. This is this sort of tribalistic sense of feeling. It's innate, like right. as you said, that the science backs this up and history backs it up. And so what I'm trying to get you to talk about is the French Revolution.
Oh, sure.
And Rousseau.
Okay, no, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, no, and I realize I dropped the ball.
And we're sort of, it's like we're experiencing a French Revolution. The guillotine was just put out in front of Jeff Bezos' house.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to remember that a lot of the people doing this stuff are very stupid and ignorant. And
yeah, but the people controlling them, I don't think they are.
No, the people I reserve my greatest rage for are the people making apologies for them.
Yeah.
When you get, whether it's Nancy Pelosi or the daytime hosts of MSNBC.
Liberalism is being trampled over.
Yeah, and and you hear people say, you don't understand, they're angry. No, I understand. This is not a difficult concept to grasp. I get that they're angry. When was the last time when you were really, really angry? I mean, destroyed property angry, that you made some really good decisions? And this idea of celebrating anger as if it's justifying gets to the stuff that you want me to talk about, which is, the French Revolution, or Romanticism, really, it comes from this idea of rebelling against the constraining rules of the Enlightenment, against liberalism in the classical sense, against this.
Let's define liberalism for the audience in
Sure.
the classical sense, and why and what we're rebelling against.
Sure. So, there are a lot of different ways to do it. I think one way that sort of works for right now in the climate that we're in is that, you had about 100 years of the wars of religion in Europe, and where people were killing each other over sometimes very small differences in doctrinal disagreement, right? I don't want to wade into different varieties of Protestants and Catholics, but from the outside, these were dumb things to kill each other over. And it didn't work. It was basically ended in a stalemate. And so what you got was the Treaty of Westphalia and the Westphalian Peace, which basically came out of that was the beginning of liberalism, which also got modified by people like John Locke and the rest. And it basically said that differences of conscience should not be settled by the sword. It said that everyone has a certain amount of innate dignity, and that they're going to have disagreements with each other about some fundamental things, and we should start judging people by their actions and punishing people for their actions, not their beliefs. And liberalism comes out of this sort of exhaustion of trying to have one-size-fits-all rules for everybody, and then it gets modified by Montesquieu and the Founding Fathers and John Locke and Adam Smith, and it's this basic idea that I was talking about before, about this Lockean revolution in ideas that says that the government is there to do a handful of things as our servant, not as our master.
Right.
And this is one of the reasons why I get very frustrated with people talking about how in the pandemic they're that the government shouldn't be doing certain things. I was like, as a sort of classical liberal guy, I spent a long time saying, look, there are a few things the government is there to do. It's there to fight wars, it's there to protect our borders, and it's there to deal with things like pandemics. These are
there to do the things you can't do.
That's right.
Like save your healthcare system, make a vaccine, make sure testing is up and running. I don't believe it's there to tell you exactly what you should, like where you should go and who you should see. I think it should be there to give you the guidelines, but I don't want to get into the pandemic.
Yeah, but my only point is that there are certain exceptions where, like,
sure, of course,
liberalism. If Nazis invaded tomorrow from their hideouts in Mexico or something, we would all agree that that the government should do something about it, right? There are certain things that classical liberals were not anarchists,
right?
And so classical liberalism was this idea that we are citizens, not subjects. When left alone, when under normal circumstances, the government should leave us alone, except when it has a really good reason to it, and it comes as much from culture as it does from philosophy. The idea of the Fourth Amendment, that we should all be protected from unreasonable searches and seizures, that has as much to do with highfalutin concepts about liberalism as it does to do with the quirkiness of English customs, which had this idea that a man's home is his castle, starting in like the 7th century.
Property rights.
Property rights.
Liberal ideal. Free speech is a liberal ideal.
Free markets, free minds, property rights, limited government, due process. Democracy is good, but it must be constrained in the sense that, the Bill of Rights is a constraint on democracy. You cannot vote away my free speech rights. You cannot vote away
majority rule is in mob democracy are not liberal foundations. It's quite the opposite. And so we basically defined it.
Right. So there was this rejection of it. There was this rejection of it that was romantic. That's why it gets called romantic. It didn't fill up people's souls. It didn't give them the sense of meaning that they wanted. People wanted to rebel against these abstract rules. And so you get this intellectual tradition that is very seductive to people because it gives them permission to do what they want. All ideas that give you permission to do what you want are very seductive, right? And it said that, you should go with your feelings. And so part of my argument is that the Romantic era never really went away, and we are actually in a profoundly romantic moment in America. I mean, you have kids. I have a daughter.
I don't have kids.
You don't have kids? I thought you had kids. Okay. The idea of good parenting is to tell your kids what they can't do, right? As much as anything else. Yes. And as a culture, we are teaching people that as a matter of pedagogy, as a matter of popular culture, go with your instincts, go with your gut. Mm-hmm. If it feels good, do it.
Live your truth.
Right, live your truth. I mean, I don't know any good parents who would say when they see their toddler running around with a pair of scissors, say, hey,
it's your truth.
I wouldn't do that, but you got to be true to yourself. Go with your instincts here, right?
I say this all the time. Like good parents, liberal, conservative, if you care about your kids, you teach them that their actions matter, that there's consequences. If they work hard, they get this much. What you would never do is say, okay, well, your sibling only worked 2 hours of chores and you worked 5, but guess what? You both get the same thing. All kids would say, no, that's not fair, because we inherently understand what is fair and what isn't, and what is moral. And as a parent, you wouldn't do that either.
Right.
You would run your family much more like a meritocracy, but it's for some reason the left treats the American people totally differently, and I don't understand why we wouldn't treat the American people like we actually love them the way we treat our kids.
Yeah, no, there are all sorts of mysteries here. There's also this problem that we have where we have fetishized democracy to the point where we think everything needs to be democratized. As I often point out, in your family, you don't put everything up for a vote, particularly when they're like little kids, right? As a friend of mine likes to say, in my family, it's a dictatorship and I'm the dick. I can't say that because my wife runs everything, but
it's matriarchy.
But you served, honorably and gloriously and patriotically in the military. I'm pretty sure that you didn't put up for a vote every time, show of hands, who thinks we should take this hill, right? We don't run, most businesses don't run as democracies. Most healthy institutions don't. Right. The Catholic Church does not put up for a vote every article of faith. For a healthy democracy, you need some internally undemocratic institutions, because that's what forms good character. Yeah. And we live in a society now where every institution needs to be sort of a platform for virtue signaling, for your own personal truths. And I just wrote a column about this. The NBA is seriously considering allowing players to wear social justice slogans on the backs of their jerseys. And this kind of breaks my heart, because one of the wonderful things about sports in this country is it's one of these safe spaces where people who disagree about politics
share it,
can reach across the aisle and talk as equals for hours without ever getting into it's
so dangerous.
It's such a dumb idea.
It's dangerous. I think it's more dangerous than just dumb. It's pop culture's done this, the movie, Hollywood. Again, have your opinions, but when you alienate half the population and they liked your movie a minute ago,
right? And
now how are they supposed to watch it? You just called them all stupid,
right?
It's so divisive that it's dangerous, and I think we're clearly seeing, again, we're seeing the effects of it. The thing about the French Revolution, and Thomas Sowell talks about this in Conflict of Visions, is it's a different take on human nature, right? And so in Rousseau's writing, he basically believed that any evil that is done by mankind is because of the man-made institutions around him,
Right.
and if you were just left to nature, and again these primacy of feelings that you're talking about,
Right.
then it would be perfect. And then their goal is to perfect mankind. And this is a very key difference between, these old romantics, the new progressives, which all agree that there's a perfectibility of mankind. And I think there's an understanding amongst our founders and the Enlightenment principles and now conservatives that understand that human nature does not change.
Right.
And there's proof of that's just a fact.
Right.
It's like, and we've already talked about that. That's a very key difference. And so it shouldn't surprise people necessarily to see how we got to this point.
Yeah. So, normally I do this spiel about how, you can understand a lot about the differences between left and right, between Locke and Rousseau. And they're just stand-ins for, it could have been two other people. But it's this basic idea. Under Locke, our rights come from God, the individual is sovereign, the fruits of our labors belong to us. For Rousseau, and we're all born, in sin from the crooked timber of humanity. And for Rousseau, no, we're all born perfect. Our rights come from the group. The group is more important than the individual. The fruits of our labors don't belong to us. They belong to everybody. And I think these are not just simply two sort of broad caricatures of different philosophical views. They're also different parts of the human heart. And so part of the problem that we get into is the way it's not like those Rousseauian feelings are somehow evil or wrong. It's that they're misplaced. And so part of the argument I make is that, and this is something I get from Friedrich Hayek, is there's what Hayek calls the microcosm and the macrocosm. And the microcosm is basically the family, your close friends, maybe the guys you served with, right? These people for whom markets and money and contracts really don't mean very much, right? If your brother showed up on your front door in the middle of a pouring rain at 3 a.m. and said, I missed my flight, I got nowhere to be, I need someplace to crash. You just say, come in, right? What are you doing standing out there? If some total stranger did that, you might not have the same reaction, right? As I often try to tell people, in my own family, I'm quite literally a communist. It's from each according to their ability, each according to their need. I don't put price tags on the food in the fridge for my daughter. I don't charge her for clothes, right? I don't charge her rent yet. We're maybe getting there. And if you have, you're talking before about the meritocracy. If you have two sons and one works harder than the other, you might pay them differently. That's true, but you wouldn't feed them differently, right? You wouldn't love one less than the other,
Right.
Should we just discard that, or is it going to?
No, just keep it going. It's kind of fun because it lets people know that we're this is our life right now.
This is the sausage getting made.
Yeah,
it's loud.
We're recording this right before votes.
But so in the microcosm, there are all of these rules about friendship and loyalty and reciprocity and love that matter. And in the macrocosm, you have to have more abstract rules about how to deal with strangers. And one of the big problems in the history of totalitarianism or leftism or rightism, for that matter, is wherever you get people who want to take the rules of the microcosm and apply them to the macrocosm. This is why I hate it when people talk about, whether it's Barack Obama or Donald Trump or George W. Bush, about how the president is our father, right? Or that we're all part of one American family, or government is just another word for the things we all do together. It's just not true. And the second you say, I have to have, there's a famous story, I'm sure you've heard it, you're from Texas, where Phil Graham was talking about his education policies, and someone in the crowd says, or someone asked what his education policy is. He says, well, my education policy starts from the assumption that I love my kids more than you do or more than the government can. And apparently some woman said, that's not true, that's not true. I love your kids just as much as you do. And Phil Graham said, oh yeah, what are their names?
Oh yeah, well,
right. And
I love Phil Graham.
Yeah, Phil's awesome. So anyway, getting back to the French Revolution, part of it was this just, Rousseau has this famous line where he says, man is born free, yet everywhere is in chains. And what he's saying is that civilization is constraining us, it's keeping us from being who we really are, unleash the noble savage within.
Living our truth.
And so one of the things that the Founding Fathers wanted to do, which is, not the Founding Fathers, which the French revolutionaries wanted to do, which is very similar to what a lot of these woke mobs are doing, is start over at year zero. to say all of our past is evil, all of our past is corrupt. We are smart enough to design society from scratch. Let's start at year zero and make these institutions right from the beginning.
Right.
And part of the problem with doing that is that there's an enormous amount of sweat equity in, the founding fathers were not stupid. The World War II generation was not stupid. There are things that are embedded in our laws and our customs that are there for a reason. And when you throw them all away and say, we're smart enough to just work this out, ignorant on our own, you get into a lot of trouble. And so virtually every tyrannical, totalitarian society that starts over at year zero, and that's what the Soviets wanted to do, it's what the Nazis wanted to do, it's what the French revolutionaries wanted to do, they end up getting really mad because it turns out that human beings are square pegs and they won't fit into the round holes of their theory, and they start trying to force them into them. And you end up getting things like the guillotine, where they killed 50,000 people during the Reign of Terror, because they're, what's that famous line from academia, which is that sure, it works in practice, but does it work in theory?
Yeah.
They want the theory to be more important than how people live, and they try to impose it from above, and it creates violence and misery.
So there's a couple key insights there. I was trying to find a quote that you had, which was really good. I can't find it. I have too many things in front of me, but it was what you said about this interpretation of history and interpreting history basically by the virtues that we know today, which is, I think everybody who does that knows that it's logically flawed.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe they don't. But it clearly is, and it's unfair. And and you have another quote that it was something that goes along the lines of those who don't cherish the best of their past will die by their own hand. And this is maybe that's a great way to summarize the suicide of the West and sort of what we're seeing now. And so that primacy of feelings, it ended up in the French Terror, right. Tens of thousands of people dying. It didn't end well. It never does. Right. Feelings you shouldn't just, it's like Jonathan Haidt's great untruth. Right. Follow your feelings.
Right.
It's much like that. And what instead took place in America, there's an American Revolution and there's a French Revolution. And you're right, liberalism is the only system ever created to help people break out of the oppression of identity politics. We've already explained why. Nearly every society on earth divided people up into permanent categories. The Lockean principle of treating every human as equal in the eyes of God and government, heedless of who their parents or ancestors were, broke the chains of tyranny more profoundly and lastingly than any other idea. That's true, but a lot of people disagree with that these days. And we're coming up on the 4th of July. There's a lot of people who don't believe that our founding was even in 1776. And that the American founding itself is bad. Yeah. And I've been pointing this out, and you've been pointing it out for a long time, well before the riots that occurred and well before people were tearing down George Washington's statue. We could see it coming for a long time if you've been paying attention. And it's trying to eat away at the founding itself. And so their argument is that effectively because our society didn't live up to the genius of the founding, at least not right away.
Right.
And we know that, we acknowledge that. But does hypocrisy of a culture make the ideas that we're trying to expound wrong?
Right. So hypocrisy is actually this wonderful thing. And so just on the judging a history thing, the way you should judge various things from the past is how they compare to the things that came before them, not from the standards of today. The first automobiles are not that impressive by the standards of today. They're really impressive from the standards of what came before, right? And the same thing applies to politics and constitutions and all sorts of things. And so, slavery was an evil. It was a profound evil. One of the remarkable things about America is that, and the West in general, isn't that we had it, but that we got rid of it.
Western civilization was the first. It started in Europe, and it took a generation in America to get rid of it.
Right, and so that's, first of all, that's something to celebrate, particularly when there are lots of countries today that still have slavery in them. Yeah. And if the people who are so passionate that they're cutting off the heads of abolitionist white men and their rage against slavery 155 years ago in America, if they could put an ounce of that anger towards, say, China, I would appreciate it. But more importantly, the importance of hypocrisy, right? So the first thing you have to concede is that slavery is wrong. It's just morally wrong. It's a moral evil. which is something that a lot of the founders actually believed.
Yeah. Jefferson wrote, because Locke's principles were life, liberty, and property.
Right.
As inalienable rights. Jefferson changed that. The reason he changed the word property was because he knew that would be taken as, property, slaves, people.
Right.
And, okay, so it's there. It's in the Declaration. Now we have a right to have people as slaves. He knew that. That's why he didn't write it. That's why he wrote Pursuit of Happiness. This is just true.
Yeah.
And the Declaration of Independence was an abolitionist document. That's just historically true. People need to realize that.
Yeah. So the point about hypocrisy is that, first of all, you cannot be a hypocrite unless you have standards that you're falling short of. Right? If you live a life of total sloth and gluttony and you profess no higher standards for how to live, you're in no danger of being a hypocrite. Mm-hmm. But if you actually uphold ideals that are difficult to live by, you're almost guaranteed at some point in your life to be a hypocrite. Because
everybody probably
everybody, and that's why we call them ideals, is because they are unattainable. They're like the North Star. They give you, they illuminate the path that you're supposed to be on. You don't ever reach the North Star. It tells you the direction that you're supposed to go. And so the hypocrisy of the American founding, that we allowed slavery on a country founded on the idea that all men are created equal in the eyes of God, is hugely important. Because without that hypocrisy, we would not have gotten rid of slavery. We would not have gotten rid of Jim Crow. So you have this it's like this long-running fuse that, detonates every now and then on a chain. You have the Gettysburg Address, where Abraham Lincoln says, 70 years ago, our forefathers came forth on this continent with this new idea that all men are created equal. And what he's doing is he's basically rewriting the story of America to make the Declaration central, more central than it was when it was written. When the Declaration was originally written, the big news in that thing was the end. Independence. We were declaring independence from the British Empire. We now think of the important part of the Declaration of Independence, the beginning, which is this proposition about what this country is about. And Lincoln takes that proposition and he makes it central to the sacrifice of the Union soldiers. He makes it central to the story of the United States of America. And then fast forward 100 years, almost to the day, you get Martin Luther King appearing at the Lincoln Memorial, where he gives his I Have a Dream speech, where he says, our forefathers, we are coming here today to collect on a promissory note.
Yeah. And
he says, this country was founded on this proposition. You haven't been living up to the best version of yourselves. All that civilization is, in a lot of ways, is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And so I hate terms like white America, but what Martin Luther King Jr. was doing was speaking to white America and saying, look, you guys tell yourselves this country is all about liberty, that it's all about individual freedom, that it's all about the pursuit of happiness. And you're proud of that, and you're falling short of your own ideals. And if you don't teach about the hypocrisy, you can't explain why this country has become a better place. And what I despise really passionately about so much of the rhetoric of the left, so much of what they're teaching in universities, like with Howard Zinn and all that kind of stuff, is that the sins of our past never get smaller in the rearview mirror.
Right.
They
render corrupt the idea of America, period.
Yeah. The Confederacy lasted. Look, Grey's Anatomy has lasted like twice as long as the Confederacy. They also lost. Yeah. We also amended the Constitution a couple of times to deal with, the issue of slavery. And yet turn on MSNBC or CNN almost at random, and you'll hear someone talking about as if slavery was yesterday and that this country has done nothing to come to grips with its own legacy about this stuff. Right. And so I want to teach about the hypocrisy. I want to teach about the bad stuff in our past, because that's the only way you can talk about how we've overcome it and how much progress we've made. And the way the left wants to talk about it is they want to talk about it as if these were indelible stains, that they never get smaller, they're like original sin, they mark us forever, and that it's intergenerational. And that's one of the identity politics problems, is that this idea, look, on my mom's side, someone in her family probably is implicable in slavery in some way. She's from Virginia, her family goes way back, although, a lot of it was in Boston, whatever. Let's just say it's like, my dad, his family was escaping Russian pogroms in the 1890s. Why I should feel, other than as a generic American, any sort of inherited guilt about what people who lived in a different part of the country did 4 generations ago. That's just not the American way. And so I'm all in favor of talking about this stuff, of learning some lessons. That police reform is a perfectly legitimate thing for people to debate. But this idea that this country is irredeemably racist and that slavery undermines everything that it stood for, when the Constitution, by any objective measure, if that alien from outer space was looking down on Earth, would recognize that the Constitution was this massive leap forward for the betterment of humanity, including of African Americans. Because if you hadn't had the Constitution, slavery would have endured.
Right. They never would have had an argument. That's the thing. The Declaration of Independence makes the argument.
Right.
All men are created equal. You can't argue with that. It's in law now. Yes, the Declaration of Independence is considered law.
It's also considered they say it's self-evident, right? So
right.
we're not even, when you say something is self-evident, you're saying we're not going to have an argument about this. It's
right.
self-evident.
It's just true. You can't argue with it anymore. Everything in the Constitution, you can't argue. Well, you can argue, I suppose. You can amend it, but it's very difficult.
Right. Which it should be.
Yeah. And we wouldn't have made progress otherwise. This is totally lost on the current movement. When you're burning the American flag, you're burning the Union flag.
Right.
You're burning the flag that has always stood for the right thing.
Right.
And what worries me the most about this progressive Marxist movement is they don't have an alternative. That's a scary place to be. And you write about this. I talk about this all the time. There are no limiting principles in progressivism. Mm-hmm. It can go anywhere. If I'm being fair to them, and I try to steelman their argument, they basically say they fight against inequality and injustice. Find things to fight against, I suppose. The problem is you can't really define those, especially inequality. Because I always wonder, when is it enough? When are we equal enough in your eyes? Like, when will you stand for the flag? Right? Like, what's your standard? When is America redeemable finally in your eyes? They don't have answers for that. They don't want answers for that. This isn't about the actual standards. And then they don't define, you can define justice, I think, in a very rational way. They do not. They just attach the word injustice on top of everything. And usually what it means is retributional justice. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean everybody's equal under the law. It doesn't mean due process to them. It doesn't mean work this hard, get this much. It means one group's power over another. Justice for that group.
Yeah, it's retributive and it's also redistributive.
Yeah,
right? And this is a point that Friedrich Hayek writes about a lot. He hated the concept of social justice. His whole argument was justice is something you demand for wrongs done to you by a specific entity or individual. When you start talking about social justice, the way the left talks about social justice, it's like the Force and they're the Jedis. It just empowers them to do whatever they want to do, right? And there's no philosophy to it. There's no internal constraints to it. It's just like, we're here to do good as we see it, and if we change our definition of what is good, that's fine, for we have the power to do that on our own. And that's one of the major problems you get with social justice. It's basically a doctrine of empowering certain groups to just have their will.
So again, the main point of this podcast, I think, is to get at like why this is happening. Because I talk to some of my more moderate Democrat colleagues sometimes, and they just kind of brush it off. They're a bunch of idiots. Mm-hmm. I'm like, no, they're not. But also no.
Right.
Like this, you guys don't understand how long this has been going on. You guys don't understand the history of Marx. You don't understand the history of progressivism in the United States. You don't understand how Marxism infiltrated the universities in the 60s, and then they used the movement of progressivism to launch what we're seeing today. You don't understand this. You don't see how well, I don't know if it's organized, but how organic and deeply rooted it is. So best you can, walk us through that.
Sure.
What I just said, but explain it in the smart Jonah Goldberg terms.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm still a big fan of the history of ideas and intellectual history and all of that. But I've changed my views about it a little bit. I often now find that for example, Marx. I've been to like 100 college campuses. The number of self-declared Marxist students who have read more than 3 pages of Marx is very small, right? Mm-hmm. What a lot of people do is, as I was saying earlier, ideas that give you permission to do what you want are very seductive.
Yeah.
Marxism serves as this sort of loosey-goosey, same thing like social justice. I think a lot of our problems have to do more with just mainstream cultural and educational failures. And starting with this idea that your emotional state is the most important thing in the world. Jonathan Haidt talks about a lot about this, where we are raising kids to feel as if hurt feelings are a form of violence. And we're raising very fragile kids. And so political correctness or cultural Marxism or whatever label we want to put on it, that stuff has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
There's a reason why it's attractive to these kids in much greater numbers than ever before, because they have been told that feelings are more important than facts, that arguments are a waste of time. They're just the way that the white power structure enforces its yada, yada, yada. And moreover, on a more broader sense, is that, the end of the book ends with, I don't have a lot of public policy proposals. One of the ones that I do have is really in favor of federalism. I think it would solve a lot of our problems to push power down the most local level possible. It would get us out of a lot of the culture war nonsense, because it would let more people live the way they want to live. But basically, I end on a very touchy-feely note. It's that we don't teach gratitude anymore. We teach the opposite of gratitude. I mean, all patriotism, rightly understood, is an expression of your gratitude for your country, right? It's an appreciation of your gratitude. Yuval Levin, my colleague at the American Enterprise Institute, makes this point that conservatism, at the end of the day, just boils down to gratitude. You look around the life that you live, the country that you live, the community that you live in, you say, these things are lovely and deserving of love, and therefore they're deserving of preservation, because I want my kids and my grandkids to have them. That's what gratitude does, is you want to conserve the good stuff. And we don't teach gratitude. We teach the opposite of gratitude. We teach entitlement and resentment. Yeah. We teach large numbers of people, including spoiled rich white kids, right? This is not just a problem with them. It's a problem with all of us, where we teach them that the world owes them something, that they're entitled to something without working for it, that if they don't get it, they have reason to be angry about it, and that the system has screwed them. And when you're raised to think that you're being denied something that you're entitled to without working for it, that creates an entire worldview that allows you to embrace this sort of mob mentality stuff. And I think that's a huge part of it. I also think, the breakdown of local community, the breakdown of organized religion, the breakdown of family, we are wired, that Rousseauian part of us wants to belong to something.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why we get into so much trouble is that because that what the sociologist Robert Nisbet called the quest for community, that innate desire to be part of a group, to be part of something larger than ourselves, if you don't have that satisfied in a healthy way, you do not lose your hunger for it. And there is an enormous industry in this country that says you can get that feeling from politics. And I honestly believe that you can't. I mean, you might get it from working on a campaign. That's fun. You have friends. They're human beings you're dealing with in real life. But you can't get it from watching cable news from home. You can get angry at the abstracted other, but you really aren't going to get the holes in your soul filled up the way you would, but actually going to church or doing something in your community or being part of a military unit or anything like that. It's an artificial thing, but it makes people angrier and hungrier for that sense of meaning, almost in part because they don't get it from that kind of politics. And
they want to do away with pluralism. They want to do away with any notion of federalism. God forbid that we let people in another state we've never met live differently than we told them to live.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I have to say, part of the problem is social media too. I mean, we're living in a kind of perfect storm with a lot of problems. I mean, I don't think we would have had the protests the way we did if we hadn't had the pandemic.
Right,
there's lots of things going on. It's an overdetermined phenomenon. But one of the problems that you get with social media, particularly Twitter, is that you get to see how people are living wrong 3,000 miles away. But because of the way Twitter and social media works, you feel like they are doing it next door.
Yeah.
And we get very angry when people are living wrong next door. And
that's interesting. That's an interesting insight.
My friend Megan McArdle at the Washington Post, she's made this argument that basically the problem with social media, particularly Twitter, is it's turning America into the worst version of small town life, where everyone's in each other's business, everyone's judging each other, everyone's looking at how they're living and saying that's wrong and complaining about them, and without providing any of the good parts of small town life.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of these people talking about nationalism, on the intellectual right, they're missing the point that the social media stuff has been nationalizing our culture for a while now.
Yeah.
And
the left has done a very good job overtaking it.
Yes, no, that's right.
Because they've been working at this since, again, the 60s, infiltrating different institutions. And this was part of a plan. It's not like it just happened.
It's what H.G. Wells might call an open conspiracy. It's everyone got the memo.
Yeah.
But I don't know that there are, like, when you say a plan, it just makes me a little nervous because
there's writing about it,
it's not like there are a bunch of people in a room saying, okay, you take Yale and you take Harvard and all that kind of stuff.
No, it was an organic kind of plan. Yeah. And this notion that, again, we talked about mob democracy, 51% of the population should tell the other 49% what to do. Again, that's also been around a while on the progressive left, pioneered by you've mentioned your favorite president, Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah.
So, are you happy that Princeton? So, because I don't like the idea of tearing statues down or names down. Yeah. But so, what do you think about Princeton taking away Woodrow Wilson?
Okay, so for listeners who don't know and don't listen to my podcast, I am at least the treasurer of the International Organization of Woodrow Wilson Haters, starting with my first book, right? And I agree with you. I don't like mobs doing anything, right? So, but that's not what's going on with Wilson. There's a process here. I also don't like people making decisions amidst a moral panic where people are freaking out.
That's what concerns me.
Yeah, so that makes me a little nervous
too. I'd be perfectly happy with you removing Wilson's name.
Yeah, but doing it now feels like
it feels wrong, right?
Appeasing the mob. So with that.
Kind of the same with Confederate. I have no reason to defend any Confederate statue. Last time I checked, I'm the Republican Party. I'm part of the Union, and we won, and I'm happy with that. Don't erase history, but also you don't need to celebrate it.
Well, that's one of the problems you get with a mob atmosphere is the melting away of all distinctions, right? Yeah. And so there are some Confederate statues. I don't want any of them torn down by mobs. Period. But there's some Confederate statues that absolutely should go because they were put up in the 1960s as a middle finger to the Civil Rights Act, right?
That's important. That's an important part of the context.
Yeah, and if you're doing that in Northern Virginia to say, screw you, black people, you're not going to have rights here as code, take that crap down, right? But changing Washington Lee, the name of the school and that kind of stuff, there's different contexts for these kinds of things. Yeah. And General Lee behaved in a certain way.
Is there any capability of nuance?
No,
in conversations
again, when you're memory holding, episodes of Golden Girls, all you can do is keep your ammo dry and wait out.
And Paw Patrol. Okay, so get back to Wilson. We don't like Wilson.
So Wilson. So the reason why Wilson is particularly bad is that, remember before I was saying you judge people by the time that they were in or what they came after? Wilson's the first Southerner to be elected after the Civil War, after Reconstruction. And he openly lamented that the South lost. Mm-hmm. He thought it was a tragedy. He liked, the way, your position and my position, I assume it's your position, about Abraham Lincoln's excesses when he was fighting the Civil War, is that they were regrettable, necessary means for justifiable ends. I don't like suspending habeas corpus or any of that kind of stuff, but it's a civil war, you got to win, right? Wilson loved that stuff about Lincoln. He just didn't like Lincoln's ends. He didn't want to free the slaves. He didn't want the North to win.
He also didn't like the Constitution.
He's the first president to openly campaign against the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, saying they were outmoded, we don't need them anymore. Mm-hmm. We need a new Darwinian understanding of the law, which basically is the living Constitution stuff. He also resegregated Washington, D.C. The practice that he put in said that you had to have a little picture on your job application so that the officials could see whether you're black or not, and you just wouldn't get a job. He also put, I think, somewhere between 2,000 and 6,000 people debate the number of political prisoners in jail. Yeah. Created the first propaganda ministry in Western civilization.
Right. People don't know that. What was it called?
The Committee for Public Information.
The committee. We had a Committee for Public Information. Yeah. Wait, was that what NPR is now, though?
No.
Because it kind of seems that way.
I understand, but one of the things that the Committee for Public Information did is they created these things called 4-Minute Men, who were domestic propaganda agents who would disperse into hotel lobbies, carnivals, movie theater lobbies, anywhere there were large crowds, and without divulging who they were, foment sort of nationalist passion, often anti-German passion. What we did to German speakers in this country was borderline ethnic cleansing. It was terrible. And so what Wilson's defenders, what they'll say to me is, well, you have to judge him by the time. Well, first of all, that's what I'm doing. He was retrograde for his time. He was much less racially enlightened than TR
It was a step backward. Because
it was a step
5 minutes ago, Germans were fine.
That's right.
And all of a sudden they weren't. So yeah.
And also,
that's a good point.
But the other thing that they'll say is, well, he was this great champion of Wilsonian democracy and all this kind of stuff. And this gets deep in the weeds, and I'll spare your listeners too much detail on this. But what you learn in high school is that Wilson championed this thing called self-determination, and it had to do with fighting with the breaking up of these European empires. That's what people call his democratic spirit. The problem is that he actually didn't care if a lot of these countries became democratic. He just thought that Serbians were better served by a Serbian dictator than a Austrian one. And so self-determination was just sort of this blanket thing that advanced races, because he was, again, a biological racist, advanced races could handle democracy, but maybe the more backward races, they would be better off with dictatorships.
Yeah.
Everything that he believed was just a slap in the face of the Founding Fathers, at least the best versions of the Founding Fathers. And so I've been on a crusade to sort of reveal the truth about Woodrow Wilson. So I'm taking some credit for a lot of this stuff, but it's complicated.
It has gotten to people over time. And like in your book, Liberal Fascism, and again, I'll caveat, you're not saying that the current liberals are fascist, but what you are saying is that beginning with the Wilson era, progressivism, which kind of changed names to liberalism for a little bit, but now progressivism is back. It has so much in common with fascism in all the worst of ways, in every way, really, and that people just don't realize it. The left doesn't know its own history, or maybe they do and they don't care. I don't know what the issue is, but so walk us through that. So this Wilsonian need to control the state entirely, do away with individual rights because they get in the way of the progress that he wants to make. How did this evolve over time to where we see it today?
Yeah, so that's a long story. And first of all, just
it's a little bit long of a story, but we got like a couple minutes.
One more note is that not only am I not calling today's liberals necessarily fascists, there's a distinction to be made between fascists and Nazis as well, right?
Yeah.
And the Nazis were, there's actually a debate among some people about whether the Nazis were even fascists.
It's a confusing word. People just kind of use it. It's hard to define.
It's very complicated. But, the Italian fascists didn't want to round up Jews and put them in ovens and all that kind of stuff. So, and
it was the Nazis added deep hatred and racism to fascism.
Right. So anyway, so the basically what happens is,
that being said, American progressives, as you just noted, like Wilson, liked eugenics and were deeply racist too.
Yeah. So yes. And in fairness, eugenics was very popular across a wide swath of America, but it was and the West, but it was particularly popular among social scientists. It was particularly popular among social engineers, and back then, social engineer did not have a negative connotation. Herbert Hoover, who was a progressive Republican, he runs for office on the slogan, do you want a politician for president or do you want an engineer? Engineering was seen as this new great thing. And so part of the problem was that with the advance of industrialization and all of these things, it was this golden moment for experts who claimed that they knew enough to govern people's lives in much the same way the French revolutionaries did. And so liberalism, which used to have no specific partisan identification to it. Yeah. I mean, Howard Taft and Joseph McCarthy called themselves liberals until the early 1950s. It was not, and of course, classical liberalism means the opposite of what a lot of progressivism means, right? Yeah. So, but what happened is you had this cult of expertise. The experts, they think that they know how to run everything and that democracy gets in the way. And that was the essence of progressivism in the height of the progressive era. And you can forgive them in some parts because we were learning so much from science and so much from engineering and all this technical stuff. And people took from this conclusion that if we know how to do all the stuff with chemicals and materials and metals, why can't we do it with human beings too?
Yeah.
And it became an ideological program, which just basically said we need to hand over government to disinterested scientists who will just run everything for us because we can't trust the little people themselves.
Weird. Where have I heard that before? Listen to the science.
That's right.
Oh, okay. What does science say? Okay, here's the perfect policy.
And it becomes this retreat. I mean, JFK in 1961 gives a press conference, maybe it was 62, but he gives a press conference at Yale where he basically says, look, the economy is just so complicated now, we just really can't put some of these questions up to the people to decide anymore. This cult of expertise is very much alive inside the progressive movement, inside the Democratic Party.
And they over apply it because you can make a good argument that experts should be figuring out, nuclear policy, right? But of trying to apply it to social and economic factors, I think is where it gets so messy.
Yeah, and also, I mean, my view is like, I'm a big fan of Anthony Fauci, but what Anthony Fauci should be doing is giving his expert opinion to policymakers who then make policy.
Yeah.
Right? And so what happened, just one last bit on this, is that people really don't remember how terrible it was towards the waning days of World War I. Political prisoners, censorship, mass violence, all sorts of terrible stuff, rationing, and the war ends, Republicans come in, they release the political prisoners, including Eugene Debs, the socialist candidate for president, who Wilson put in jail and refused to ever let out. And they campaign on this return to normalcy. And they say, let's go back to our lives. Let's go back and just live like we did before Woodrow Wilson's War of Socialism. And the progressive intellectuals hated this. And they campaigned for years as an intellectual program under the slogan, "We planned in war." And they wanted to be able to use the techniques that Wilson used during the war to run the economy.
Yeah.
And FDR runs expressly on that platform.
And this speaks to people's emotions because it's planned together.
Yeah.
We're one tribe. This
Right.
feels right.
That's one of the reasons why I hate moral equivalent of war arguments, which is a huge idea for the progressives. It starts with William James. And it's this idea that we need to organize society as if we're at war. That's what, Tom Friedman and all these guys want to do with climate change, is mobilize as if we're at war.
War against everything. War against poverty.
Yeah,
war against inequality.
The problem with moral equivalent of war arguments is that it doesn't give you, there's no, when we're in a total war, there should be no safe harbor. You can't just sort of sit on the sidelines. Everyone's supposed to be in it together. Mm-hmm. That's why it should be very rare when you mobilize as if you're at war, because in a democracy, you're supposed to be able to say, this isn't my cause, count me out, and still be a good citizen. The most fascistic thing that is said daily on college campuses and on TV shows and newspapers is this idea that says if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Mm-hmm. So this idea that there's no safe harbor from politics.
Yeah.
And so we now, with the Black Lives Matter stuff, I think there's a core, decent moral argument to the Black Lives Matter movement, but we are now in the phase where you're going to be made to care, where you have to not only agree with the sentiment, you have to agree with the entire policy program, or you are a racist.
Yeah,
and
you actually can't even escape the accusation these days.
Yeah.
There is no standard. There is no goalpost. It feels entirely like we're ghost hunting.
Yeah, be subservient to our agenda entirely and helpful to our agenda entirely, or be the enemy. And that is a totalitarian mindset. It's a dangerous mindset, and it is it's all over the place. And I think that we get that in our politics in part because the other traditional sources of meaning and belonging and commitment have been shrinking in our lives, and so we're trying to get out of politics, but politics is not very good at providing in a healthy way.
Okay, so in our last minute or two here, how do we get out of it? Is it simply teaching? Is it simply education? Education, teaching the gratitude for the good ideas that made America?
That I would like to think that wouldn't hurt. I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons why I want to send power down to the most local level possible is that you'd still have culture war fights, right? But the winner would have to look the loser in the eye.
Yeah.
You're no longer talking about imposing your values on someone 2,000 miles away. You're talking about imposing your values on someone next door, that maybe their kids are best friends with your kids. And it creates a certain humility. It creates a certain sort of like, let's work this out so we all can get along attitude, rather than this, will to power, zero-sum thinking that you get when you nationalize everything. So I think sending things down to the most local level possible, it will also, and I'm sure you experience this all the time talking to, various constituents and whatnot, there are a lot of people out there who are becoming increasingly populist because they feel like unseen, unnamed forces very far away are making all the important decisions in their lives. Mm-hmm. You send power down to the most local level, the powers that be stop being these mysterious globalists or whoever, and they start being people with faces and names. It's not, the powers that be, it's Todd or Phil, Well,
it's like Tim Scott was saying when we were talking about police reform. He's like, we have to say this. Every Democrat city where they're having problems could have made all these reforms.
Right.
At any time.
Right.
There's this growing sentiment, and this is a cultural problem. It's not politicians in Washington. Politicians in Washington are always just responding to their constituents. People don't want to believe that because they don't like their politicians in Washington, but they're a pretty good representation. And everything, according to the American culture right now, has to be solved by what is Congress doing?
Right.
Why don't we ask, should Congress do anything?
Right.
And why? This is a very conservative thing to ask. Again, limiting principles are extremely important. I can easily list our limiting principles. When you present me with a problem, I ask, is it a problem?
Right.
Or are you just really mad? Okay, so let's figure that one out first. Okay, it is a problem. Okay, who should solve it? That's the next question. Okay, maybe it should be solved by the federal government. Fine. All right, does it protect individual liberty? Is it a service that infringes on somebody else's rights? Is it actual equality, or is it group on group?
Right.
Like, are you just trying to give somebody an advantage over somebody else? These are important questions. Does it add to the debt? There's limiting principles that drive your decision making. The progressives have none of this stuff. It's just pure power.
Well, so this goes back to a big theme of my very underrated and undersold book, Tyranny and Cliches, which is that I'm very proud of conservatives, at least when I wrote that book, that we find ourselves constrained by dogma and ideology.
Yeah.
And all an ideology in my book says, literally, not just figuratively, in my book, all an ideology is a checklist of your principles.
Yeah.
And
it's not a bad word.
No, it's not a bad word. And it's funny, in Europe, in European languages, ideology and worldview are basically synonymous. And so for me, my point is just simply that being ideological means that you are willing to make a list of your primary concerns.
Yeah, there's a framework. There's a framework with which to solve problems.
And so when people say don't be ideological, what they're really saying is
don't disagree with me.
Don't disagree with me. It's like when people say, the time for argument is over, the time for debate is over. What that means in practical politics is shut up and get in line.
Yeah.
And
just do what's right.
Yeah, and a democracy.
Aren't we supposed to debate what's right?
Yeah, democracy. This is a fundamental flaw in American life: is that democracy is about disagreement, not about agreement. Is that we're supposed to have arguments about stuff, and government is supposed to be the place where those arguments are reconciled.
And the nature of a republic in a federal system is to build a governing framework where those arguments don't spill over into mob politics and decay and corruption, which I think is what we're seeing now, which is why it's so important to protect that republic.